Now, regardless of the formalized events being held or cancelled, we are in the season of Carnival, and there is a different kind of energy in the air. Onika Henry is a university-trained sexologist who has a BA in theatre arts with a minor in psychology, and she uses this combination of specialties for the benefit of her clients who need to talk about sex and sex-related issues in an environment that is healthy, fun, productive, and most of all, safe and non-judgmental. She joins us to speak about some of the energy in the air, and we thank her for doing so. How are you doing, Onika?
Hi, DK. I am fine, thanks, and thank you for having me.
Our supreme pleasure. Now, I want to start this conversation a little inside out, as opposed to saying it stops along your journey to where you are now. There is a TEDx talk that you did, and I want that to be the main focus of at least the first half of this conversation. Now, the title of that was Carnival is a Remedy, a toolbox for decolonizing Caribbean sexuality. Now, what are some of the markers from your perception of Caribbean sexuality that indicate that this type of work needs to be done?
All right, so let's first start with how we view bodies, the kinds of bodies. And as we're in Carnival, I'll use Carnival kind of like the context or the background. If you look at the way we commercialize or promote Carnival, particular body types, perhaps even particular shades of skin, particular hair types, what I talk about in my TED Talk is the fact that Carnival gives room for all kinds of body types. That the persons who began Carnival did not look anything like what was considered the standard of beauty, which was very Eurocentric. And so the bodies that have been traditionally disregarded, the bodies considered not looking like the standard that we see in the magazines abroad, are the bodies that Carnival welcomes. Once you have a body, you can find a place in Carnival. So that is one way. Another thing I pointed out in my TED Talk is there is this ritualistic cross-dressing that can happen in our Carnival space. In other words, any kind of body, regardless of gender or sex, can really play or portray any kind of character. And I use that analogy to talk about the fact that many of our Caribbean ancestors, those of us who have been descendants of slaves, descendants of indentured servants, that our ancestors never had a very strict binary when it comes to sex and gender. And so there is this nice flow between what is masculine and what's feminine, and anybody really can portray any kind of character, any kind of role, regardless of sex or gender. So that's kind of making an argument for letting go of the very rigid binary ways in which we view sexuality, or either male or female, when in fact, it's never always been that. It's never been that way, in fact. Not even in nature is it that strict. So those are just two examples of how we can look at Carnival, the traditions in Carnival, the examples in Carnival, to begin to pull out lessons that show how we can view our sexuality in better ways,
and
healthy ways.
And healthy ways, and we want to get back to the using Carnival to increase health in more than one way, both physically and metaphorically. But in that TED Talk, and I go back to the TED Talk, there is an experience that you shared, and it really resonated with me. And it was during Juve when this person came up close to your camera, and in that moment, it seems as though everything kind of melted away, and you all would not even have touched, but shared a moment that remains with you. And that is something that I totally empathize with, and I appreciate the fact that you can be as big as you want to be, as small as you want to be, as part of the group as you want to be, or just part of this amorphous mass, kind of everything or nothing. And that kind of ties into what something else you were talking about in terms of Carnival as, and you gave different, I'd call them keywords, a site of resistance, rebellion, catharsis, reclamation, and healing. What are some of the ways that we can use the Carnival as that space, as that method, as that means, that bridge to some of these places and things?
Right. So one of the things I advise or suggest, or perhaps offer people, is to first think of an intention for this Carnival space. Let's look at Carnival as an annual community joy practice, an annual ritualistic community joy practice, or communal erotic practice, if you will. What do you want out of a ritual practice in a Carnival space? Are you looking to act out or speak to something that you want to resist, something that you want to rebel against, something that you want to talk out loud about. Therefore, you perhaps might choose the old mass route, where you are using words, playing with words in order to give voice to issues that you may have. If you are looking, for example, to feel comfortable in the skin that you're in, to really inhabit your body, find joy and pleasure in the body that you have, you may decide, well, you want to play pretty mass and go out there and perhaps the skimpiest costume that you're most comfortable in. What that does is that allows you to reclaim your sexuality as owned by you, as something that is powerful and fun and controlled by you. You do what you want with that body, with your body. And that's one way to begin on that path of self-acceptance, and also beginning on that path of self-love, recognizing that no matter your shape, color, size, or even ability or disability, that your body has been built and is able to give you pleasure and can do many, many amazing things. There may be persons who are struggling with some kind of conflict in their sexuality, particularly if we're looking at the LGBTQ plus community, and how they are struggling to find complete acceptance. One of the forms that I have recognized that attracts that community to Carnival is Kalinda, our local martial arts. Kalinda was stick fighting. Kalinda is about conflict, and it's about conflict resolution. And so if you're looking to find a space where you are playing with your ability to resolve conflict, to go through conflict, to face conflict, whether that conflict is coming from internal or external or both, that Kalinda, that martial arts space is the place to do that. And I myself had an experience of going through what that Kalinda space does when I visited Bois Academy run by Rondell Benjamin, and just to experience what that might be like. If you experiencing any kind of fear, and perhaps you want to get over certain kinds of fears in life that may be translating into let's say it's translating into your sexuality, making choices around sexuality. Perhaps dealing with fear in terms of learning to walk on stilts. And so our Carnival mass camps, our group communities are spaces where we learn to play. And we learn from playing, quote unquote. We learn in a space where the elders are, where people have gone before us, they are in that space. So we create a container, a safe space for us to deal with those kinds of issues. And I could point out so many other examples of how we can literally use, for example, characters to process mentally, what is it like to embody this character? Is it something that I want to become? Is it something that I am that I want to let go of? And so going through that process of mentally processing, mentally thinking about and analyzing a Carnival character, embodying it, and using those tools as a way to understand self and to practice behavior change.
So, and you speak of these things, and while you do that, and you call Rondell Benjamin and the Bois Academy, and we also mention the name Jamie Filbert and the names like King Acid, who transitioned to become an ancestor. And we're having conversations with other people who are using traditional and folk forms as a process of understanding, learning, and developing. Why don't you think there's a little more mainstream, Onika?
I think because people don't recognize just how powerful it is. It has always been presented as this huge party that we all just let go on, we go and we have fun. I don't think people have recognized that when our ancestors mindfully and deliberately created these rituals, these chants, these characters, that was their process and their way of dealing with the social, mental, emotional, spiritual issues that they were faced with when they were living on the plantations. So there's a disconnect between understanding our Carnival history. There's a disconnect between us and understanding where Carnival came from, what was its purpose, what was the intention of having this festival, and how it served the people who created it. I think once we begin teaching that in schools and from primary schools going right through, not just looking at the superficial artistic part of it, even though in my mind, in my view, the entire Festival of Carnival is basically expressive arts therapy. But we only look at what looks pretty and what feels good on a very superficial level, and there isn't an intentional teaching of people going through the Carnival process choosing a character or choosing a form, and then learning how you engage with this form, and then practicing that form, and then finding that crew, your tribe, your community who is going to be going through this with you and who will be with you on the road when you finally enact and fully embody and represent perhaps a transformation that's been happening in all those weeks and months leading up to being on the streets of Carnival. So there's a disconnect, in my opinion and from my view, that does not allow us to fully embrace and enact the power that is within our Carnival arts.
All right, so we're going to try to intentionally connect some of those dots. When we return from this break, we are speaking with Onika Henry. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with Onika Henry. And Onika, now we're going to start in terms of like go back to some of those brass tacks. So you're a sexologist. You're also a consultant, O. Henry Consulting Services. What led you to the point where you are at now?
Right. So I certainly did not start from childhood, primary school, secondary school, thinking when I grow up, I'm going to study sex. I did not even know one could get a degree in sexuality. I didn't know the field or that type of professional existed. When I finished my university degree, a few years afterwards, I found myself working at the Tobago HIV Secretariat. And while working at the Secretariat, my role there was as the Information Education Communications Officer, which meant that I had to design programs and interventions to help with HIV prevention and education, and basically managing people's sex lives, living healthy sex lives. And so it was my work in the field of HIV that led me to become more curious about why we make the decisions we make around sex and sexuality, and how I could help people make better decisions. It literally came from a public health perspective. It came out of the wish, the hope to save lives and make people's lives healthier. And so I began searching online for like online courses, ways I could educate myself about human sexuality. And that led to a search for universities, which led to a search for funding, which eventually led to a scholarship. And I was able to study a Master's of Education in Human Sexuality at Widener University in Pennsylvania.
And do you think that there is a need, and when I say a need, because many times there may be a need or a gap or something to be addressed, but at the same time, there may not be enough. Do you think there is that need here in Trinidad and Tobago, and do you think there's enough knowledge of the need, which might be something even a little distinct?
Yes, so there is definitely a need, even if we only look at our teenage pregnancy rates, if we look at how we've been doing in terms of our HIV rates, like how much difference have we made? Because people are definitely knowledgeable about HIV and how it's transmitted. So it's not as if there's lack of knowledge about that. But our rates are still nowhere near where we would like it to be, which means people are still engaging in risky sex. So there is definitely a need. Awareness of the need, I think there is awareness, at least from my experience working on the ground. I have been to PTA meetings, I have been to secondary schools, I've even been invited into religious spaces, Christian spaces, Islamic spaces, to talk about sex and sexuality. And the word on the ground is we badly need this. I came back home in 2014, and since then to now, the response when I go out to the workshops or presentations, the response is the same. Why are you not in the schools? Why is there not more? So there is definite awareness of how badly we need this. I think there is still a fear about having comprehensive sex education in schools or across the board, because people are still, I think, largely ignorant of exactly what sex education entails and what is this person coming to teach my children. But yeah, there is definite awareness, I think, that this is badly needed and long overdue.
Now, when you say, you said it more than once, and I smile, and a kind of wry smile, on the ground, because on the ground can be very different from a policy level. But also wanted to ask about school and sexual education in schools. What is it that we're getting wrong when we think, okay, well, sexual education in schools, I don't really want it? What kind of factors should we be thinking about?
Right. So first of all, let me say from the quote unquote mini tour that I have done, at least in Tobago, not so much Trinidad, but in Tobago, I have never yet come across a parent, a teacher, a principal who after my presentation has any issue with bringing comprehensive sex education into their space. In fact, like I said, they always ask, why aren't you in the schools? So I've never had any protests. I've never had any negative responses. I still meet parents, whose children I've interacted with who ask, so Onika, when we starting, what are you doing? So I've never had that kind of feedback. And so here's what I think is happening. I think the persons who are in the positions to make the decisions have not really sat down with experts in the field to understand how this can be done. That's one. Two, I have never implemented any kind of intervention with sexuality education with youth without first engaging the parents so that they know exactly what's happening. Two, people are afraid of the quote unquote taboo topics within sexuality, which we are going to teach. And so they're afraid that we're going to be addressing things like homosexuality and transgender. They think we're going to be teaching children how to have sex, and that is actually the very, very last thing on the list of things to teach children when it comes to sex and sexuality. And so there's a fear about what their children are going to learn. There's a fear that the children are going to abandon what they've been taught and abandon particular standards, and all of a sudden are going to become very, what's the correct term I want to use? Okay, for lack of a better term, loose, and want to experiment with things because now they know so much and they want to try it out. And so those basic fears are in place. And so once you address those fears and help people understand, well, yes, we are going to teach about things that you may not like or you may not agree with, but it's not forcing them on your children. They are simply explaining that there are all kinds of people in this world and they all deserve human rights. And also I explain to parents that there's because of how sensitive the topics are, there's a list of topics and when they're going to be taught, on the calendar. And so a parent can choose to keep their child out of that particular lesson if they want to. And so giving parents a lot of choices, first doing the mini education with the parents and with the influencers or leaders in the community so they know what we as in sex educators are coming to teach. And once you address the gatekeepers of a community, the gatekeepers of a space, and they know what you're coming to do, there usually isn't any problem. At least I have never come across any problem. And
sometimes it feels as though it has to be all one way or all the other way. This kind of absolutist, either you're the most chaste or you're the loosest and you're out there doing the most. And how do we mainstream that kind of paradigm mindset so that there's information as opposed to just saying, okay, well, we are sending you down this path?
Right. And so it's just the same thing that we've been discussing. It's about education. It's about letting people understand that there are all these choices. And at the end of the day, what your ultimate goal is health. So if we go down this path, is this path going to lead to healthy outcomes? If we go down the other path, is it going to lead to healthy outcomes? And once you have that goal in mind, that overarching goal, that overarching intention of good health, of healthy sexuality, of respectful and safe and healthy relationships, then you don't have to worry too much about going to the extremes, because then people would understand that those extremes are not healthy and would not lead to the outcomes that they want. So once you have set that overarching goal, that overall intention of good health, of things that are safe, sane, and consensual, then it's easy for people to then navigate their way to where that safe, sane, and consensual is for them and for their partner or partners, which will still give them a healthy and helpful outcomes.
All right, so, and that makes sense. And we thank you for your time, Onika Henry, and your website is www.onikahenry.com. And because I'm sure this would have just sparked the conversation. So we want to thank you very much for giving us that little spark for us to find out some more. And on behalf of the entire news team, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I'm DK Roster. Have a good night.